You've done this before, you might even be doing it right now. You're sitting somewhere, your desk, your couch, the driver's seat of your car in a parking lot, and nothing particularly dramatic is happening. Nobody insulted you. You didn't just get bad news. The world is spinning at its normal, unremarkable speed. And then, without any warning, without your brain sending a memo or filing a request, your body just takes over. Your chest expands, your lungs pull in a deep, slow breath, way deeper than anything you've been breathing for the last few minutes. And then it comes out. Heavy, audible, a full, unmistakable sigh. You didn't choose to do that. You didn't think, you know what this moment needs? A dramatic exhale. Your lungs just staged a tiny coup, hijacked your body for about 2 seconds, summed sigh, and then handed control back like nothing happened. And honestly, you probably didn't even notice. But here's the thing, everybody else did. Your coworker 2 desks over just glanced at you sideways. Your partner on the other end of the couch paused the show and asked, "What's wrong?" Your mom, if she were here, would already have her hand on your forehead, checking for a fever and asking if you're eating enough. The moment that breath left your body, everyone within earshot became an amateur psychologist. They wrote your emotional biography in half a second. He's stressed, she's frustrated, something's bothering him, she's being passive-aggressive. Society has already decided what your sigh means before you even closed your mouth. And here's the uncomfortable part. They're almost certainly wrong. What if I told you that nearly everything you've been taught to believe about sighing, why you do it, what it signals, what it means when the person sitting across from you does it, is neurologically off the mark? What if the sigh has almost nothing to do with your emotions most of the time? What if your body is actually executing a critical emergency maintenance protocol, one that, if it ever stopped running, would cause parts of your lungs to physically collapse? To understand what's really happening every time your chest rises and falls with that uninvited deep breath, let's follow a day in the life of someone whose sighing has become everybody else's problem. Meet Mark. He's 28 years old, works at a mid-sized marketing firm in Manhattan, and lives in a Brooklyn apartment with one window that offers a stunning, bright, unobstructed view of a brick wall. Mark is, by all accounts, a pretty normal guy, but recently he's developed a reputation. His girlfriend has started counting his sighs out loud. She's currently averaging 11 per evening, which she announces like a sportscaster keeping score. His coworker Jake is convinced Mark secretly hates the job. His mother calls every Sunday and opens with, "You sound tired, honey," which is just her way of saying, "I think you're falling apart." Mark is not falling apart. Mark is not depressed. Mark is not making a passive-aggressive statement about the current state of his relationship or his career. But something is happening inside his body every time he takes that involuntary deep breath. Something far more interesting and far more important than anyone around him suspects. Over the next few minutes, we're going to follow Mark from his morning commute to his evening couch, decode exactly what's firing inside his nervous system every single time he sighs, and piece together a story that stretches from the microscopic air sacs in his lungs all the way to the ancient survival instincts hardwired into his brain. And here's the twist that most people never see coming. The reason Mark sighs, the reason you sigh, might have absolutely nothing to do with how you feel, and everything to do with keeping you alive. It's 8:47 on a Tuesday morning, and Mark is standing on a packed L train heading into Manhattan. He's got one hand on the overhead bar, one earbud in, and he's breathing. Not thinking about breathing, just doing it. In and out, shallow and steady, the way your body handles it when you're not paying attention. This is what scientists call eupneic breathing, which is just a fancy clinical term for normal, automatic, nobody's thinking about this breathing. Your brainstem runs the whole operation without ever consulting your conscious mind. It's autopilot. It's been autopilot since the moment you were born, and for the most part, it works flawlessly. But here's the design flaw nobody tells you about. Autopilot breathing is a little too shallow. When you're breathing on cruise control, each breath only moves about half a liter of air, enough to keep oxygen flowing and carbon dioxide leaving, but not quite enough to fully service every corner of your lungs. And your lungs have a lot of corners. Deep inside them, packed in like microscopic foam, are roughly 480 million tiny air sacs called alveoli. These are where the actual magic of breathing happens, where oxygen passes into your blood and carbon dioxide passes out. Each one is thinner than a soap bubble. Each one needs to stay open and inflated to do its job. Think of it this way. Imagine your lungs are lined with bubble wrap, 480 million individual tiny bubbles, each one impossibly thin and delicate. When you breathe normally, each bubble gets a gentle partial puff of air, enough to keep it mostly open. But here's the problem. mostly open isn't good enough over time. After a few minutes of calm, shallow breathing, some of those bubbles start to lose pressure. They deflate slightly. The wet inner walls stick together, like a sheet of bubble wrap that got damp and went flat. And once a bubble collapses shut, it stops exchanging gas. It goes offline. So if this keeps happening, if enough bubbles quietly deflate and seal themselves closed, your lungs start losing usable surface area. Oxygen transfer drops. Your body begins a slow slide toward a condition called atelectasis, which is the medical term for partial lung collapse. And partial lung collapse is exactly as unpleasant as it sounds. So your body has a contingency plan, a built-in override that kicks in before things get anywhere near that dangerous. It forces you to sigh. About every 5 minutes, your brainstem, the same autopilot that's been running your quiet, shallow breathing this whole time, issues an emergency command. It forces your diaphragm to pull in a breath that's roughly twice the volume of a normal one. That burst of air rushes through your lungs and blows every collapsed bubble back open in one shot. It's not gentle, it's not gradual, it's a forced reinflation of the entire system. That's what a sigh actually is. Not a feeling, not a mood, a maintenance protocol. And what happens after that big breath is almost as interesting as the breath itself. Researchers have discovered that in the minutes leading up to a sigh, your breathing pattern becomes subtly irregular, the rhythm drifts, the spacing between breaths gets uneven, like a drummer slowly losing the beat. Then the sigh lands. Immediately after, there's a brief pause, a tiny gap between breaths that's slightly longer than normal. Scientists call this a post-sigh apnea, and after that pause, something resets. Your breathing rhythm smooths out, stabilizes, and returns to a clean, consistent pattern. So the sigh doesn't just reinflate your alveoli, it recalibrates your entire respiratory rhythm. It's a hard reboot, the biological equivalent of turning your lungs off and on again. Your breathing was getting glitchy, so the system forced a restart, and now everything's running clean. Mark, still standing on the L train, just sighed without noticing. Nobody around him noticed either. The subway is too loud, everyone's in their own world. His lungs just ran a scheduled system reset. His 480 million bubbles are fully inflated again. His breathing rhythm just got recalibrated, and the whole operation took about 2 seconds. No input required from Mark's conscious brain, no emotional trigger, no existential crisis, just infrastructure maintenance. And here's a detail that might keep you up tonight. Or rather, it won't, because it'll be happening while you sleep. You sigh in your sleep too, less frequently than when you're awake. But your brainstem still runs the protocol. While you're dreaming about showing up to work in your underwear or finally winning that argument you lost in 2019, your unconscious brain is quietly keeping the bubble wrap inflated. Even when you're completely offline, the maintenance crew never clocks out. So if sighing is just a mechanical maintenance trick, an emotionally neutral piece of biological plumbing, then there's a question that should be bugging you right now. If Mark's sigh on that subway car was nothing more than a scheduled lung reset, then why does it feel like it means something? Why does his girlfriend keep score like she's tracking evidence? Why does Jake hear it across the office and think this guy definitely hates his job? Here's why that question matters. Because when scientists actually tried to answer it, they ran into a wall. The data didn't just challenge their assumptions, it contradicted itself. Study after study confirmed that sighing is linked to emotion. That part seemed obvious. Ask anyone on the street and they'll tell you sighing has something to do with feelings. But when researchers tried to pin down which feelings, the results looked like someone had thrown darts at a board blindfolded. People sigh when they're stressed. They also sigh when they're relaxed. They sigh when they're frustrated, overwhelmed, and anxious. But they also sigh when they're content, peaceful, and perfectly fine. They sigh during arguments, and they sigh during massages. They sigh at funerals, and they sigh at the end of a really good meal. If sighing were linked to one emotion, sadness, let's say, the science would be clean and simple. But sighing shows up across the entire emotional spectrum, including states that are polar opposites of each other. That's like discovering that your car's turn signal activates both when you're turning left and when you're turning right. At that point, you have to ask, maybe the turn signal isn't about direction at all. Maybe it's reacting to something else entirely. For a long time, that something else was a mystery. Then, in 2009, a team of researchers at the University of Leuven in Belgium designed an experiment that cracked it open. Let's put Mark in the chair. Mark signs up for a psychology study. He saw the flyer in a coffee shop and figured, why not? There's probably free snacks. He walks into a lab, sits in a chair, and gets fitted with sensors that track his breathing. In front of him is a screen. The researcher explains the setup. Shapes will appear on the screen. Each shape is a signal. A red triangle means guaranteed bad news. Mark is about to get hit with a blast of loud, obnoxious white noise piped straight through the headphones he's wearing. It's not dangerous, but it is genuinely unpleasant. Think of the sound a smoke detector makes when the battery is dying, except louder and sustained. A green circle means safety. No noise. He can relax. And then there's a yellow square. The yellow square is the cruel one. It means a 50-50 chance. Maybe noise, maybe silence. Coin flip. Mark just has to sit there and wait. Now, here's what you'd probably expect. Mark should sigh the most during the noise, right? That's the stressful part. That's when the unpleasant thing is actively happening to him. But that's not what the researchers found. Sighing spiked after the noise ended. When the obnoxious sound cut out and silence returned, people's sigh rates jumped significantly. And when the yellow square appeared and it turned out they were safe, no noise at all, the sigh rate went up even more. The biggest burst of sighing didn't come from the stress itself. It came from the moment the stress dissolved. And when participants were asked to rate their emotions during the experiment, the pattern locked into place. The more someone sighed, the more they described themselves as feeling relieved. But here's the finding that made the whole thing click. It didn't matter whether the relief came from the noise actually stopping or from simply discovering they didn't have to hear the noise in the first place. Both triggered the same sighing response. The threat didn't have to be real. The stress didn't have to physically happen. Just believing that you were safe, just the anticipation of stress evaporating was enough to make the body sigh. Relief. That was the hidden variable connecting everything. And once you have that key, the contradictions in the data suddenly make perfect sense. Watch how it plays out in Mark's afternoon. It's 3:15 p.m. Mark has been grinding through a quarterly analytics report for 3 hours straight, the kind of spreadsheet that makes your eyes feel like they're being slowly sanded down. He finally finishes the last section, hits save, and pushes his chair back from the desk. A massive sigh rolls out of him. That sigh is pure relief. His nervous system just registered that the stressor ended, and it responded the way evolution taught it to, with a deep, resetting exhale. But here's where it gets interesting. Mark looks at his inbox. There's another report due by Friday, a different spreadsheet, different client, same soul-draining work. He stares at the screen, and before he even opens the file, he sighs again. This second sigh isn't relief from something. It's an attempt to create relief. Mark's nervous system recognizes that a new stressor is arriving, and it reaches for the same tool, the deep breath, not because the threat is over, but because it's trying to manufacture the feeling of the threat being over. It's self-soothing, a preemptive relief valve. Your body uses the exact same physical mechanism in both directions. A sigh can be a response to feeling relieved, or it can be an attempt to feel relieved. Same breath, same muscles, and same 2-second hijack of your respiratory system, but serving two completely different psychological purposes. It's like laughter. You laugh because something is funny, but you also laugh nervously when you're uncomfortable and trying to make a tense moment feel lighter. Same sound, different function. The body is economical. It reuses its best tools. This is why sighing shows up across the entire emotional map. It's not that sadness causes sighing, or that relaxation causes sighing. It's that any state involving the transition toward relief, whether you're arriving at relief or reaching for it, will trigger your body to sigh. Finishing a stressful test? Relief. Starting the next problem and trying to calm yourself down. Reaching for relief. Hearing bad news and trying to process it? Reaching for relief. Sitting in a quiet room at the end of a long day? Arriving at relief. The common thread was never the emotion on the surface. It was always the nervous system underneath trying to regulate itself. And this brings us to something that's been puzzling evolutionary biologists. Why is sighing contagious? You've probably noticed this without being able to explain it. Someone near you sighs, and within seconds, you feel the urge to do it too. It's not as dramatic as yawning. Nobody's writing clickbait articles about sigh contagion, but the effect is real and measurable, and the explanation might be thousands of years old. Some psychologists have proposed that because sighing became associated with relief, with the passing of a threat, human brains eventually learned to read another person's sigh as a safety signal. Slides. If you're in a group of early humans hiding from a predator and the person next to you suddenly takes a deep, releasing breath, that exhale carries information. It says, "I think the danger is over." Your brain picks up on that signal and mirrors it. Your own body sighs in response, downshifting your nervous system from high alert to something calmer, It's like when you're in a meeting and the boss's phone rings and everyone freezes, and then she glances at the screen, ignores it, and keeps talking. The whole room exhales. Not because anyone decided to, but because one person's body language broadcast, "We're safe," and everyone's nervous system picked up the signal. For thousands of years, this was genuinely useful. Sigh contagion helped groups coordinate their threat responses. One person's exhale could ripple through an entire tribe, bringing everyone down from fight or flight simultaneously. Efficient, elegant, a beautiful piece of social biology. But there's a catch. In 2026, nobody is hiding from predators in a conference room. The ancient neural software is still running, but the context has completely changed. And when you take a survival mechanism designed for life or death situations and drop it into a modern office, a Brooklyn apartment, or a crowded subway car, things start to get misinterpreted. This is where it gets personal. Because the way your brain reads other people's sighs, it's almost hilariously wrong, and it might be quietly messing with your relationships in ways you've never even noticed. In 2008, a group of researchers ran a study that was almost comically simple, and the results were quietly devastating. They gathered 117 people and gave them short, hypothetical stories. Nothing elaborate, just basic scenarios describing someone in an everyday situation who, at some point in the story, sighs. Then the researchers asked one question: what do you think the sigh meant? The pattern was overwhelming. People assumed the sigh meant something negative. Almost every single time. The most common interpretation? Sadness. After that came frustration, disappointment, and resignation. Positive interpretations, relief, contentment, relaxation, were rare. When people heard about a stranger sighing, their brains didn't run through a balanced menu of possibilities. They jumped straight to the darkest option on the list and committed to it. Now watch this play out in real time with Mark. It's 2:30 in the afternoon. Mark is sitting at his desk and he sighs. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a normal regulation-sized sigh. Lungs running their 5-minute maintenance cycle, bubble wrap getting reinflated, respiratory rhythm recalibrating, completely mechanical. Mark doesn't even register that it happened. But Jake, sitting 8 feet away, registers it instantly. Jake's brain does what 117 study participants did. It skips past every neutral or positive explanation and reaches straight for the negative shelf. Without even thinking about it, Jake has already decided that Mark is upset about the project, that Mark doesn't want to be here, that Mark is frustrated with the workload. Jake doesn't say any of this out loud, but he makes a mental note. And the next time their manager asks how the team is doing, Jake casually mentions that Mark seems a little burned out lately. By the end of the week, Mark has a reputation he didn't earn, based on a sound his body made without his knowledge or consent. And nobody, not Jake, not anyone in that office, ever considered the possibility that Mark's sigh meant absolutely nothing. But the study had another finding that cuts even deeper. When the story described someone sighing alone, observers cranked up the emotional intensity. The exact same sigh happening in solitude got labeled as deep sadness, loneliness, even despair. The human social brain doesn't have a file folder labeled involuntary respiratory maintenance. It only knows how to sort sighs into emotional bins, and when it's forced to pick, it picks the saddest one in the drawer. And here's the genuinely ironic part. When the researchers flipped the perspective, when they asked participants to imagine themselves doing the sighing, suddenly the interpretations diversified. Tired, bored, just thinking, frustrated but not seriously, just needing a deep breath. The full, generous range of possibilities came flooding in. We grant ourselves nuance. We know our own sighs can mean 17 different things or nothing at all. But the moment we hear someone else sigh, that generosity vanishes. We collapse all the complexity into one flat, dark assumption and treat it as fact. This asymmetry has been running quietly in the background of Mark's life for months. His girlfriend hears him sigh and tallies it as evidence of unhappiness. His mom hears him sigh over the phone on Sunday and fills in the blank with worry. So in the cruelest part, Mark has started noticing their reactions. He sees his girlfriend's face shift. He hears the concern in his mom's voice, and even though he felt perfectly fine a second ago, a new thought starts forming. Wait, am I unhappy? Is something wrong with me? The sigh meant nothing, but the people around him gave it meaning. And now their meaning is starting to become his, not because it was true, but because when enough people react to your body like something is broken, you start believing them. But here's the thing about other people's stories. Once they get inside your head, they don't just sit there quietly. They start rewriting yours. After weeks of watching his girlfriend's face change every time he exhales, after hearing Jake flag him as burned out, So after his mother's voice going soft and careful every Sunday, something has shifted inside Mark's head. He started running their algorithm on himself. Now, every time his lungs execute their 5-minute reset, a thought follows the breath like a shadow. There it is again. Everyone around me thinks something is wrong. Maybe they see something I can't. And this is where it gets physiologically nasty, because self-judgment isn't free, it costs your body something real. Mark catches himself sighing and thinks something must be wrong with me. That thought registers in his nervous system as a small threat, not a panic attack, just a low pulse of anxiety. His stress ticks up a fraction, and we already know what happens when stress rises, even slightly. The nervous system reaches for the relief valve. It makes him sigh again. Which he notices, which he judges, which creates more stress, which triggers another sigh. The sigh was never the problem. It was the solution, his body's quiet way of recalibrating. But the moment Mark started judging the solution, he turned it into a source of the very stress it was designed to ease. Other people's stories got inside his head, and his head built a hamster wheel out of them. So how does he step off? By changing what the sigh means to him. Not emotionally, mechanically. By replacing the story with data. If you're driving on a hot day and your car's cooling fan starts spinning faster, you don't panic. You understand, the engine is running hot, the cooling system is compensating, the fan is doing its job. The fan isn't the problem. The heat is. Your sighs work exactly the same way. If you're sighing more than usual, so your body is reporting that stress levels are above baseline and your nervous system is compensating, running maintenance more frequently, reaching for relief more often. The sigh is not the malfunction, it's the repair crew working overtime, and that information is useful. Not in a dramatic way, in a quiet, practical way. If your body is running maintenance more often than usual, maybe you need 10 minutes away from the screen. Maybe you need to close a few mental tabs that have been draining your bandwidth all day. Your body has already identified the problem. The least you can do is listen to the report instead of punishing the messenger. So the next time you catch yourself taking that deep, uninvited breath, don't fight it. Don't analyze it. Your body has been running this protocol since the day you were born, through every exam. Every argument, every long afternoon that felt like it would never end. It never asked for your permission because it never needed it. The sigh is not a confession. It's not a weakness. It's one of the most quietly brilliant systems your body operates, and it has only ever asked one thing of you. Stop getting in its way. Now you know what it actually is. It's not sadness. It's not frustration. It's not your subconscious waving a red flag or your emotions leaking out through your lungs. It's 480 million microscopic air sacs getting reinflated in one clean burst. It's your breathing rhythm snapping back into alignment after drifting slightly off beat. It's your nervous system reaching for a small, quiet moment of relief, sometimes because the pressure just passed. Sometimes because it's still building and your body is trying to take the edge off for you. It's a maintenance protocol that's been keeping you alive since before you were conscious enough to wonder why. That's it. That's the whole story underneath every sigh you've ever taken. But here's what I hope you carry with you after this video ends. Not just the science, the shift. The next time you hear someone sigh, pause before your brain writes their story for them. Maybe they're going through something. Or maybe their lungs just ran a 5-minute reset and their body did exactly what bodies do. You don't know. And the honest, generous thing is to admit that you don't know, instead of filling the silence with your darkest assumption. And the next time you catch yourself sighing, really catch it. Feel your chest expand and hear that slow exhale leave your body. Try something different. Don't judge it. Don't interrogate it. Don't let it become the first line of a story about everything that's wrong with you. Instead, just listen to it. If this video changed the way you hear something your body does 1,000 times a day, share it with someone who needs it. The friend who sighs a lot and apologizes for it every time. The coworker who thinks everyone's exhale is a personal message. Your mom, who will probably sigh with relief when she hears there was never anything wrong with you in the first place. Your lungs have been having a conversation with you your entire life. Maybe it's time you started listening.